Welcome to this explainer. You know, if you've ever tried to measure the messy, complex reality of human behavior, you've probably figured out pretty quickly that raw numbers only tell half the story. Today, we're making a powerful philosophical shift. We are going way beyond the numbers to explore the highly strategic, systematic world of qualitative research methods. Look at this brilliant Einstein quote. It perfectly establishes why we desperately need qualitative research when we're dealing with the complexities of the human experience. Think about things like end-of-life care preferences, or the profound feeling of mastery a patient has over a chronic illness. These are massive, impactful phenomena, and you literally can't just assign a simple number to them. To really see the contrast here, imagine we're studying patients with epilepsy. Now, a quantitative approach asks a super specific, measurable question, right? Like, what proportion of people stop taking their medications for 3 consecutive days in a 6-month period? That is vital data, for sure. But qualitative research asks a totally different question. How does medication actually shape the lives of people with epilepsy? Quantitative counts the stops, but qualitative gets right into the profound lived experience, the daily struggles, and the actual human behavior behind those data points. All right, moving to section 1, the 4 core products. So what tangible results does this approach actually produce? If we aren't just calculating averages and p-values, what do we get? Well, it turns out qualitative research yields 4 highly structured, concrete, and scientifically rigorous core products. First up, we've got recurrent themes or hypotheses. These are the unifying concepts that identify patterns of behavior. Second, we can actually generate survey instrument measures, essentially using this open exploration to design way better quantitative surveys later on. Third, it produces taxonomies, which are basically classification systems. And fourth, it builds conceptual models or theories. These 4 core products are absolutely crucial to keep in mind because they prove this isn't just guesswork. These are concrete scientific outputs. Let's jump to section 2. Crafting the blueprint question. To reverse engineer how we actually get those 4 core products, we've got to start with the blueprint, the research question itself. And writing one is a lot harder than it sounds. Unlike quant studies, you don't start with some rigid hypothesis you're trying to prove. You start with an open slate. It must be inductive, meaning you aren't assuming you already know what's going on. It's got to be exploratory, and crucially, it has to be non-directional. So you aren't just looking for positive aspects or negative barriers. You're neutrally exploring the whole shebang. So, following this exact formula is what builds the boundaries around your question, ensuring you don't get totally lost in the data. Step 1, start with an action verb, like understand or characterize. Step 2, identify your neutral topic. And step 3, define your sample and setting with extreme precision. Trust me, these boundaries are going to be your best friend. Let's look at this in action. A poorly framed question might ask to understand knowledge, attitudes, beliefs, and barriers regarding contraception among all women everywhere. That tries to cover the entire waterfront. It's literally impossible to accomplish in a lifetime. But check out the good question. Characterize barriers to contraception use among young Latino women. Boom. We have our verb, our specific neutral topic, and a highly precise population. It's focused, it's feasible, and it sets us up perfectly. Which brings us to section 3, the art of interviews. Now that our blueprint is ready, we need a mechanism to actually dig up the data. Enter the in-depth interview. But remember, this isn't a rigid script. It's an organic, guided conversation. You use a guide with a few broad questions, but you have the total freedom to follow leads if a new idea pops up. That said, as the researcher, you've got to keep what we call Jersey barriers up along the edges, just to prevent the conversation from veering completely off a cliff into totally tangential territory. And who are we having these guided conversations with? You aren't randomly sampling every 5th person who walks by. You're purposefully seeking out key informants. The goal here is breadth of perspective, not statistical representativeness. You want people who have direct, intimate, lived experience with your precise topic and who are actually willing to open up about it. Now, here's a wild concept. Unlike quantitative research, you do not decide your sample size in advance. So how do you know when you're done? You stop interviewing when you hit theoretical saturation. This is that fascinating aha moment where you're listening to your informants and you suddenly realize no new ideas are emerging. You're just hearing the same concepts repeated. That's when you know you're finished. Getting that top-tier data requires some intense discipline. You need to know your guide so well you aren't just staring at your paper. You've got to be super aware of the power dynamics in the room. You have to wear your qualitative researcher hat, meaning check any clinical judgments at the door. And honestly, here's the hardest one. You must embrace the incredibly awkward 7-second silence. Sometimes people just need a beat to compose their thoughts. If you rush in to fill the quiet, you're going to kill the insight. On the flip side, there are major pitfalls you must actively avoid like the plague. Never ask leading questions that push someone toward a specific answer. Don't convey your own worldview. Don't cut a topic short by moving on too fast. And whatever you do not interrupt. I know it's so tempting when the interview gets going and you get excited, but you have to exercise extreme restraint and just listen. All right, let's wrap this up in Section 4, Real-World Thematic Output. Let's bring this all together and see what a finished product actually looks like out in the wild. We're looking at a real study investigating how resident physicians at academic medical centers handled language barriers with their patients. The researchers used in-depth interviews with these residents to explore this exact phenomenon. Through those carefully guided interviews, a massive recurrent theme emerged, which, remember, is the very first of those 4 core qualitative products we talked about. The theme was this: doctors totally knew they were underusing professional interpreters. Instead of calling for help, they described their own behavior as just trying to, quote, get by. And this right here brilliantly captures the ultimate value of qualitative research. In the transcripts, residents literally admitted they take a deep breath and just fumble through. A simple standardized survey with checkboxes would never ever capture that raw, deeply human reality of doctors just fumbling through a physical exam. That is the magic of the guided conversation. So ultimately, whether you're generating themes, designing survey instruments, building taxonomies, or forming conceptual models, those core 4 products, every single qualitative explainer must end by asking the critical question, does this pass the so what test? How do these rich insights actually advance our understanding of the world or help real people? When done rigorously, qualitative research doesn't just pass that test, it defines it. So I'll leave you with this. The next time you're faced with a complex human problem, are you just going to count what happened, or are you actually going to figure out why?